We're Compound Everything, and this week we are discussing the letters of Jeff Bezos.
Shareholders letters.
Shareholders letters. Yeah, and this was kind of inspired by a post that we saw by someone on Instagram.
Yes.
And they had said, I sat down and read all of Jeff Bezos shareholder letters, and it was 40,000 words about, and this is what I learned. And we thought, oh, why don't we do that?
One of the most successful businesses in America.
Mm-hmm.
Why wouldn't you read the shareholders letters?
Yeah, exactly.
And take his advice.
Yeah.
It's like a business school education, reading each of those shareholders letters.
It's literally
never been to business school, but I think honestly, probably reading those letters is a very good start for anyone looking to start a business.
Yeah, it's a business education in 40,000 words.
Oh, 100%.
For free.
For free.
So it's a lot of benefits to reading it.
It's just interesting to see his insights.
Exactly.
So we have no idea. We've gone through the shareholders letters and we took away separately, and we've taken away key points each, and so we're gonna kind of have a discussion. Yeah. Why don't you start?
Okay.
What was your first takeaway?
So my first takeaway was Bezos and Amazon could see where the ball was going. So that was a constant theme throughout all the letters.
Yeah.
But in the 1997 letter, which is probably actually the most famous, that was the first one.
Not only is it the most famous, it's the pillar.
It's really a mission statement.
It's the cornerstone of Amazon. So really if you read no other shareholder letter, read the 1997 shareholder letter, and you will take away pretty much everything that Bezos is looking to do with Amazon from its inception. I mean, obviously they kind of course corrected here and there, but the 1997 letter is so important that they included it with every single shareholder letter thereafter.
It really is the cornerstone.
So if you read no other letter, read the 1997 letter.
So number one, they could see where the ball is going, and this is the sentence that caught my attention. But this is day one for the internet, and if we execute well for Amazon.com today, online commerce saves customers money and precious time. Tomorrow, though, personalization, online commerce will accelerate the very process of discovery. So they knew, they could kind of see where it was going. So I just thought, okay, they could see that the internet was going to be huge. They could see where the ball was going. That was not my main point, but that was my first point that I took out.
Sure. Well, jumping off of that, they could see how the shopping experience could be tailored to the customer. My first point was they're extremely customer centric. So first and foremost, Amazon focused on the customer.
They have customer centric as well at number 5.
Sure.
And they were obsessive about their customers.
Well, they were obsessive over their customers, and that led them to see where the ball was going with retail. I think what they were trying to do is look backwards in a sense. So they were trying to say, what would the customer want and how can we give that to them? So they could see where the ball was going. So their goal in management and leadership and whatnot, Bezos' goal and Amazon's goal as an organization was to give the customer what they want. Because they knew if they did that and they could please the customer, everything else would fall into line. And so their philosophy was work backwards. And so seeing where the ball was going, as you mentioned, they could see that the internet had a huge runway, and they could kind of foresee what the customer would want. Well, what would the customer want? They want excellent service, they'd want convenience, and they'd want low prices. Those are their 3 pillars that they kind of built Amazon on.
And you see that woven through each letter.
Through each letter, pillars. Exactly.
Yeah, and he said, when it came to customers, he said, a lot of customers or a lot of companies say they're customer driven, but they're competitor driven. So in 2010, Jeff Bezos writes, many companies describe themselves as customer focused, but few walk the walk. Most big technology companies are competitor focused. They see what others are doing and then they work to follow. And he just goes on about AWS and whatnot. But they said that many times, he said, we don't focus on our competitors. We focus on our customers because our customers will tell us what they want.
Right. Well, and he also said in another quote, indirect quote, he said, we at Amazon are not afraid of our competitors. I tell my people, don't be afraid of our competitors, be afraid of our customers. Because if your customers leave, you've got nothing.
Yeah. And one thing that was interesting, because they were so customer obsessed.
Yeah.
And I think I want to say, and I might be wrong here, but every shareholder letter mentioned in some form their absolute obsession with customers.
Customer service.
Yeah. And you could see one of the things that he really understood was moats.
Yes.
In his letters. And you could see him, I mean, he obviously has a good grounding in the value investing world because he mentions Ben Graham a few times and whatnot. But you could see that there were certain moats that he was trying to build within Amazon.
For sure.
And one of those moats that he was working very hard was a brand moat.
Yeah.
And in order to build a brand moat, you need very loyal customers. And I think that's in part what drove their customer obsession and their customer centric thinking. They wanted those moats because they knew the deeper those moats could get, the better their company would grow.
Oh yeah, for sure. When they were customer centric, going back to my point, was they're customer centric to the point where they almost, as you read their letters, they had a hierarchy of importance. Jeff Bezos did in terms of accountability, and the organization of Amazon, they had a hierarchy of accountability. First was their customers. So the customers came first. Second came their shareholders, and close third came their employees.
Right. See, and I found it was opposite. I found it was customer, then employees, then shareholders. But I wouldn't necessarily say it was a hierarchy. I would say it was more of a circle.
Sure, a virtuous circle that ended up happening. So his belief throughout the shareholder letter, and he happened to be right, I think, was that if you took care of customers, then everything would take care of itself because you'd have happy customers that keep coming back, and it's a virtuous cycle. And he's mentioned in a few of his shareholder letters, something I love is flywheels. So you find a flywheel effect in many businesses, both a virtuous and a vicious flywheel.
Yeah.
So it can go either way. And his goal is to optimize a virtuous flywheel for Amazon. And the interesting thing, the reason I said it was a bit of a hierarchy, and maybe you identified that a little differently, but it was definitely customers first. And then he said to shareholders, look, if we take care of these customers, you will be taken care of. And then if shareholders are well taken care of, then our employees will be well taken care of as well. And interestingly enough, he was very interested in having the employees become shareholders.
Yeah. And the other thing with customer centric is how Amazon had to be 10x better.
Yeah.
He never used that term. He never said Amazon needs to be 10x better, but it just reminded me of that idea. And the one hurdle that they always had to make Amazon better, because that he knew that it had to be 10x better in order to have that brand moat, in order to keep customers happy, in order for them to come back. They had to be that company that offered everything, had to be better, right? And the one thing that they could not, that they could not offer, that was a headache for them, was the speed at which they could get the package. So that was the one way Amazon was not better and more
than traditional retail.
Right. So they had a better
selection,
inventory, selection. They had better prices. Right. There was even at one point he said we need to make our packaging better. He wrote about that in a shareholders letter. I can't remember which one. And he said it is so frustrating for the customer to have to deal with all these ties and all these plastics. We need to make the packaging better so that it's easier for the customer to access the product.
Right.
Like he was so obsessed with making things better and easier and simpler for the customer that, he even focused on the packaging of the item. But the one thing they couldn't do was getting it there on time.
Right.
And all of these years later, here we are, and I order something on Prime, and it legit shows up at our doorstep the next day.
Right.
So they've done it.
Well, they've almost done it. I mean, the only thing that would make it better, the only reason that traditional retail has a bit of an edge is if you read it right now. When they first started, it started as a bookstore.
Right.
And I can't remember the number, but they had more than quadruple the amount of book selection that a traditional book retailer would be able to hold. So if you were looking for some sort of book, chances are if you couldn't find your normal retailer, you could find it on Amazon and probably find it cheaper.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So we've done number one. My first point was they could see where the ball was going. And like I said, that was in 1997 and it wove it. So you could see them pivoting throughout. So you could see that. And then we did your number one, which was customer centric.
Going back to your number one for a second, seeing where the ball was going. In 1999, he had talked about how the basically mobile internet was going to be much bigger and bigger thing. That's right. And that was in 1999. So he kind of he probably didn't see the exact form of it, but he almost foresaw that we'd be using mobile applications and things like that more readily. And I mean, the iPhone didn't come out until 2008.
I was going to say, when you think of him being able to make that call about mobile.
It's huge.
It's huge because in 1999, we had dial-up.
Yeah, we had dial-up internet.
And we had to drag that long cord and then plug it in, right?
Oh, for sure.
And a lot of people didn't even have internet. They were going to the library.
We only had it because I was a student in the university.
Exactly. Yeah. So it's interesting that, when people were using dial-up and the internet was not really accessible in every single household like it is today, he could still foresee that we were going that way. Yeah. That was a huge call.
Oh, it was a huge call. Yeah. So just foresight and just seeing the breadth and distance of that runway they had, massive.
Exactly.
So my number 3 was Amazon is not now the same company as it was when it started.
Okay, very different than my number 3.
Okay, what was your number 3?
Long-term growth focus.
Well, okay, fair enough.
But let's focus
Fair
on,
enough.
let's definitely
Okay.
focus on your number 3.
So the thing that really struck me is how talented Jeff Bezos was as a CEO. He started out as an online book retailer, just books. That was it.
Then they went into music.
And that was in 1994,
Yep.
right? And then they just kept adding products and adding products and adding products. And now you've got this company that, has all sorts of products, pretty much almost anything you want, but also includes things like Amazon Web Services, which is web hosting and whatnot. And that's now a huge part of their business.
It's ridiculous.
And so just seeing the way that the business evolved speaks to Jeff Bezos' talent, being able to manage all that. And then he spoke in one of his letters, he spoke in deep technical terms about a lot of the ins and outs and workings. And I kind of went through all the Amazon shareholder letters and gave them a title. And I labeled that one Amazon.com, Under the Hood.
Right.
So it just kind of, he was speaking in technical terms about all the things that are going on Amazon. I didn't understand most of it.
Yeah.
And so it's a very different company than when it started.
Different.
And so I thought that just speaks really volumes to Jeff Bezos' abilities as a manager. So they recognized that there is natural extensions of things that they could get into business-wise that would generate significant returns on invested capital.
Yeah, and when you talk of Kindle, one thing I think of is, and this goes back to him just being like the foresight of where things were going. Someone asked him like, well, how are you going to get an author to sign a book digitally?
Yeah.
And he said, I don't know. But if there's a way to do it, we'll find it.
We'll find it. Yeah.
And just his, like, he's just constantly thinking outside of the box and constantly thinking, like, how can I take this online? How can I take this, whatever, this event or this product or whatever it previously was? How can I make it online? How can I make it more efficient? How can I make it more accessible?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and the change in Amazon, the reason that Amazon is not the same company as it was when it started is because of innovation. They have a spirit of innovation throughout their company.
So one point I have that I just briefly touched on was they did not have a lot of bureaucracy.
Okay.
And he talks often about how quick they could move and how bureaucracy is the killer of companies.
That's funny because that was one of my subpoints to my last point.
Okay,
So
there you go.
you keep going.
So in 1997, which we've said is kind of like the cornerstone letter.
Yeah.
Bezos writes, our goal is to move quickly to solidify and extend our current position while we begin to pursue the online commerce opportunities in other areas. And our goal is to move quickly.
Right.
When you have a lot of bureaucracy, you cannot move quickly. And I think
stifling.
It's stifling. I think it's Charlie Munger who says bureaucracy killed Sears.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, and that goes to kind of our point we discussed, before, in that Amazon.com was a company that was coming in to compete against traditional retailers like Walmart and Sears, who had more money, frequent patrons, brand name, and they were coming to compete against them.
Yeah. And
they knew it.
And
that was
like now when you talk to people, it's like, well, of course they could. Who doesn't shop online? But that was in a time when no one. I remember when I started buying things on Amazon, which was fairly early.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, and I remember, I talked to people, and a lot of them would be like, "Oh, aren't you afraid to put your credit card in?"
That's right.
So now when you look at it, it's like, well, obviously it makes a lot of sense to go online, but it did not make a lot of sense. It was very difficult to get people
It was foreign.
put their credit card. Like that was a big barrier for some people.
For sure. No, they had to act quickly, and the fact that they're a young company with a spirit of kind of innovation and kind of trial and error, as they got bigger, I think they didn't specifically say this, but they say it in a roundabout way. They specifically tried to avoid significant bureaucracy.
Yes.
One of the things that jumped out at me, and this is a bit of a subpoint, Jeff Bezos said in one of his letters, I think it was the 2007 letter, he said, make decisions with 70% of available information.
Yes, I remember reading
Because
that.
if you wait for 90%, you're probably too slow.
Yeah.
And so he said, look, if you make a decision and you're wrong, as long as you can course correct, it may not be as expensive as you think.
Yeah.
But being slow will be expensive for sure.
Yeah, that was super interesting.
Yeah.
And that does, again, it's the quick.
It's
we
quick.
want to move quick, and he said that in 1997, and then he said that in that letter again.
Well, and then the other thing is, just to see his flexibility as a CEO, he talked about, type 1 and type 2 decisions, right?
Yeah, he did.
So type 1 being ones that you can just kind of you make a decision, but it's a door that you can go both ways.
Yeah.
So if you make a mistake, well, you just go backwards. No big deal.
Exactly.
Versus a type 2 decision, which is an irreversible decision.
Yeah,
once
you make it and there's no going back.
You still make quickly, but you maybe make it with more counsel.
Yeah. And so one thing about moving quick, also, he always talked about day one.
Yes.
What is day one? He always said, we're still on day one.
We're still on day one.
We're still on day one. And at the beginning, for the first letters, it was, we are at day one of the internet.
Yes.
Jeff Bezos knew when day one for the internet was over, because all of a sudden, in one of his letters further on, he said, Amazon is at day one for e-commerce.
Interesting.
And he switched. And so it was still at day one, because that idea of day one is very important to Amazon.
Yeah.
But he knew when day one of the internet was over, and he wasn't willing for Amazon to sit and be stagnant and continue focusing on day one of the internet. And they pivoted into day one for e-commerce.
E-commerce, right.
Yeah.
But the point being is he saw a way to take some new innovation, i.e. the internet, and make a current retail better.
Yeah. And
How
then
do you do that?
He took day one of the internet and made and then he took day one of e-commerce, and he made the e-commerce that he had even better.
Yeah.
So what are some of the things that we either A, haven't touched on, or B, points that you have that I didn't mention?
So a couple things that I took away from it as an investor.
Okay.
One,
and that's what we want. As investors, we want to learn, it's fun to learn about business, but we really want to take things as investors. What should we be looking at in businesses?
Right. What are our takeaways as investors? One, read shareholders letters.
Big time. Yeah.
So if you're an investor and you don't take the time to read shareholders letters, you're probably doing yourself a disservice. If anyone had taken the time to read the Amazon.com shareholders letters, even starting way back, you could see where he was trying to take the business.
You could also see when, you read a lot of posts that says, if you had held Amazon this long, and then the next, it's kind of a witty, tongue-in-cheek kind of comments but no one would have held it. But here's the thing, if you were a shareholder and you were reading his letters, when Amazon tanked in 99 or 2000 in the dot-com bubble, he addressed that. I think the very first sentence of that shareholder's letter after Amazon tanked was, ouch.
Right, yeah.
That's the very first word in that letter was, ouch.
Yeah.
And then he goes on to explain what happens, but he goes on to talk about the strength of the business. Had you been a shareholder, you would have held.
Right.
Because you would have seen who was running the company.
Right.
And you would have been like, okay, this guy is navigating. He knows why it happened, and he's continuing to be an absolute beast at capital allocation.
Absolutely, and trustworthy.
Yeah.
Right. So you can see the inner workings of Jeff Bezos's mind as he lets pen go to paper. Yeah. And so as a shareholder, what more do you want? I mean, Warren Buffett has said that if you don't read the annual reports and you don't read the financials, and in this case, if you don't read the shareholders letters, it's kind of like you're playing poker without looking at your cards.
Fair enough.
Right? You might win, you might not, but you have no idea what you're holding. Read shareholders letters. They can be extremely insightful. They're telling you where they're going.
Or if the shareholder's if the CEO is not telling you where they're going, and it's going through a really rough time, you'd be like, why are they not addressing the fact that their stock is down 80% down?
Yeah.
This is something a CEO should be addressing for their shareholders.
Right. If he's brushing it, contrarily, if he's brushing it under the carpet, or then you've got a problem.
Yeah.
So read shareholders letters, point one. Point two is everyone's looking for a growth business, right? Everyone wants to find that growth business. One of the things that stuck out to me as an investor reading about Amazon is their success was instant. It happened almost right away. And so as you read the 1997 letter to 1998, it says sales grew this much, our recurrent customers grew this much, our users grew this much. And so it was just huge year over year.
Right. And actually, to that point, he says at one point in one of the shareholders' letters, if you have a business that has instant runway success, it will take 3 to 7 years for that to show as an economic benefit. That's almost that's not exact quote, but it's pretty close because I can't remember exactly what he said. But he said if you find a business that they just started, or something within the business that has almost instant runway success, he calls it, 3 to 7 years to actually show up economically for the investor.
Yeah.
So that was something very intriguing to take away.
It's not going to translate into earnings per share necessarily right away, because they're going to have to invest in infrastructure and things like that.
Which, as an investor, is an advantage, because if we know that, we can read that. And he said he's seen that across several businesses they've done. So he's not just using it for Amazon.com. Yeah. Several different things that they have done. That's what he's seen, 3 to 7 years. If we have that my target 3 to 7 years. That gives you an advantage because Wall Street's looking 3 months out.
Oh, for sure. They're looking quarter by quarter.
Yeah, you know, and if they don't have that instant success and they don't see the economic benefit,
Yeah,
they're out.
They're out. Yeah, or you have a little blip here or there. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So having said that, near instant success, but I would put the caveat there. It has to be a not has to be, but in this scenario, Amazon was a near instant success with an extremely long runway.
Yeah.
Right. So that was the cap.
And just an absolute genius of a CEO.
CEO, yeah, who knew how to allocate capital.
Yeah.
Which goes to the next point. The next point was cash flow is king.
Oh yeah, cash flow. He talks about that all the time.
Yeah.
He does a nice little example. I think it's around 2005 where he actually literally breaks down accounting for the shareholders.
Yeah, it was. Yeah. So he said, even in his 1997 shareholder letter, he says, if we have to make our, essentially, I'm paraphrasing, if we have to make our GAAP accounting look pretty versus taking the cash flows, we're going to take the cash flows every time. Is the future of a business is based on cash flows, not necessarily earnings, and he breaks that down very nicely in the 2005 shareholder letter.
And it reminded me as I was reading, it says if you can't explain something in a way that a 5-year-old can understand, then you truly don't understand it. And he did a very excellent job of breaking down why cash flow matters to the investor, and anyone could read that letter and understand like, oh, that's why Bezos says they'll pick cash flow every time.
Yeah, the other thing to look for as investors, just kind of a sub point to that, is look for a business model that is cash favored and capital efficient.
Oh yes.
What that means is, I think it was in 1998 or 99, they had run $1 billion in sales, had $30 million of inventory, and $30 million of capex.
Yeah, that's crazy.
That's insane.
That's insane.
Right? They had a gem of a business.
Yeah.
Those don't come along every day.
Yeah.
So if you find one of those businesses that has economics like that, who's run by a honest, transparent CEO who knows what he's doing, you buy it and you don't ever let it go.
Yeah, and you keep an eye on it.
And you keep an eye on it. So that was my last point, really.
That was your last point.
Yeah.
So I think what we can do to sum it up is actually use Jeff Bezos. I think this is from 2015, around there. He actually tells investors what to look for in a dreamy business.
Okay, let's
so
do it.
in this shareholder, this is the first sentence of, I think it is the 2015 shareholders letter. And it says, a dreamy business offering has at least 4 characteristics. So this is according to Jeff Bezos. So he's telling us as investors what we should be looking for in a dreamy business.
Dreamy business. Okay.
Customers love it. Number 1. It can grow very large to a very large size. Number 2. It has strong returns on capital. Number 3. And it's durable over time with the potential to last for decades.
Beautiful.
He says when you find one of these, you don't just swipe right, you get married.
Right. That makes sense.
Yeah. And so from Bezos himself, he is telling investors that those are the pillars in which you want to look for to find a good company.
Good growth business.
Yeah. So I think I'm going to wrap up my thinking and then you can wrap up yours.
Sure.
From my takeaways from the shareholders of Jeff Bezos. In 2016 or 2017, Jeff Bezos was asked, what does day 2 look like? Because he always said, this is day 1 for Amazon.
Right.
This is day 1. And so someone asked him, so obviously they read the letters. They said, Jeff, what does day 2 look like? And he said, day 2, well, I'm going to read it here because it's Jeff Bezos.
Jeff Bezos' own words.
Yeah, his words are more authoritative than mine. So this is what he says. Day 2 is stasis, followed by irrelevance, followed by excruciating, painful decline, followed by death. And that is why it is always day 1. So that's my closing. Like, that was, when I read those, I was like, that was that paragraph and that portion from that letter. Like I said, it's 2017 or 2016.
Yeah.
To me, that wraps up why they are where they are, because it is never day 2.
Yeah, it's never day 2. And the foundations for Amazon, my last point would be that the foundations for Amazon, as we spoke of earlier, were formed on day 1.
Day 1.
And so in 1997, he goes through and highlights for shareholders what exactly they want to do.
Yeah.
And if you read through the various letters going forward, you can see he's executing exactly as he said.
Exactly.
And it's been fascinating to watch.
Yeah.
Really from the sidelines, unfortunately for us.
Yeah. And I have to say, I'm a little sad that he's not going to be writing the shareholders letters anymore. Yeah. That's a little upsetting. Like, Buffett's been writing them for decades. Yeah. And unfortunately, we don't have as much time with Bezos. But, you know, there's still a lot of valuable information for someone.
There's so much wisdom in there. And I think you could read them over and over a few times and glean more and more every time.
Yeah. So that wraps up our discussion. Again, you should go and read the shareholders letters for yourself. And we will see you next week.
Perfect.